I don't think I'll ever forget that Thanksgiving dinner. Not because of the turkey, the laughter, or the warmth of family gathered around the table, but because of the way a single comment cut me to my core. Please stay with me until the end of this story, because I think you'll understand why I need to share it. Sometimes the people who laugh the loudest at you are the ones who should be most careful. My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 29 years old, and for the past few years, I've quietly been building something that most of my family doesn't even know about. But on that Thanksgiving night, all anyone seemed to see was what I hadn't achieved. The dining room smelled of roasted turkey, buttered rolls, and cinnamon pie. My mother beamed as she carried out the final dish, while my cousins swapped stories about their jobs and new cars. I sat quietly near the end of the table, listening more than speaking, as I usually did. My family has always been loud, big voices, big opinions, and a love for competing over who's doing better in life. And then there was my Uncle Gary. Gary has never missed an opportunity to remind people of his supposed successes. He's in his mid-50s, balding but always boasting about how the market has been good to him. He built his reputation in the family as the one who made it. The uncle with the house, the boat, the investments, and the never-ending advice for everyone else. Halfway through dinner, as conversations drifted between mortgage rates and holiday shopping, Gary leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and set his sights on me. "So, Claire," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Still renting that little apartment of yours? 29, and not even a starter home to your name." The room fell quiet for a moment, forks pausing midair. My cheeks burned as all eyes turned toward me. I forced a small smile, trying to brush it off. "Yes, Uncle Gary," I said softly. "Still renting." He chuckled, shaking his head as if my life choices were the punchline of a joke. "TSK. At your age, I already had a mortgage, a wife, and 2 kids. You've got to step it up. Can't be throwing money away on rent forever. Don't you want some stability?" A few cousins snickered. Someone muttered, "He's not wrong." I stared at the mashed potatoes on my plate, pretending not to notice the pitying glances around the table. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told them, was that for the past 4 years, I'd been working 2 jobs, saving every spare dollar, and investing carefully. Not in flashy cars or a big house with a mortgage that weighed like chains, but in something else entirely. I bit my tongue, letting Gary bask in his little moment of triumph. But deep down, a thought whispered inside me, "If only you knew, Uncle. If only you knew whose name is on the deed to the house you're sitting in right now." I didn't say it then, but I would. And when I did, it would change everything. Because just 1 month after that humiliating Thanksgiving dinner, Uncle Gary would be knocking on my door. This time not with mockery, but with desperation. I've learned something over the years. Silence can be its own kind of power. When people think you're quiet, unassuming, or even behind in life, they stop looking too closely. And that's exactly how I'd been able to build something most of my family couldn't even imagine. After Thanksgiving, I replayed Uncle Gary's words in my mind more times than I care to admit. His laughter, the smug tone, the way he leaned back in his chair as if he'd delivered some kind of wisdom. Everyone else saw it as a throwaway moment, just Gary being Gary. But to me, it was fuel. Because while my uncle spent his evenings bragging about his boat and posting selfies in front of a house he could barely afford to keep, I'd been running a different race. It started 4 years ago. I was 25, working a marketing job by day and tutoring high school students in the evenings. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I cut corners everywhere I could. No designer clothes, no expensive trips, no nights blowing money at bars like my friends. Every extra dollar went into savings. By 26, I had scraped together enough for my first down payment. Not for a house to live in, but for a duplex on the edge of town. I lived in one unit and rented out the other. That rent covered my mortgage. Suddenly, I wasn't just paying bills, I was building equity. That taste of freedom lit a fire under me. I spent every weekend studying the housing market, combing through listings, and learning how to spot undervalued properties. By 28, I had quietly added 2 more rental houses to my name. Small, modest homes that didn't look like much from the outside, but they paid me every single month without fail. And then there was the 4th property. It came up at an auction, an older colonial-style house on Maple Drive. The previous owner had fallen behind on taxes, and the bank was eager to offload it. The place needed some work, but structurally it was sound. I ran the numbers twice, then a 3rd time, and finally raised my hand. The deed became mine within the week. What I didn't realize at the time What still makes me smile when I think back on it was that the tenant already living there was none other than my Uncle Gary. That night, sitting at Thanksgiving dinner, he mocked me for being a renter, completely unaware that the landlord he mailed his monthly check to was me. But the part that no one could have predicted was how fast things would change. Because by December, Gary's comfortable world, the one he loved to brag about, was about to collapse. And that collapse would send him straight to me. When the eviction notice landed in Uncle Gary's mailbox, he had no idea the person behind it wasn't some faceless company. It was his failure of a niece. The first domino fell just 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. I was at home, sipping coffee at my kitchen table, when I got the notification from my property manager. Tenant in Maple Drive is 3 weeks late on rent. Attempts to contact have failed. Tenant, Maple Drive. Uncle Gary. I stared at the screen for a moment, my stomach doing a slow turn. I hadn't wanted to manage that property myself. It felt cleaner to keep some distance, so I used a management company. To them, Gary was just another name on a lease. To me, he was family. I typed back a short reply. Proceed as usual. That phrase had weight. It meant late fees. It meant notices. And if things didn't improve, it meant eviction. For days, I heard nothing. Until one evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, the update was sharper, colder. Second notice served. Tenant claims financial hardship. Requests extension. Financial hardship? This was the same man who'd held up his wine glass on Thanksgiving, bragging about playing the market and how his investments were a goldmine. I could almost hear his voice echoing in my head, mocking me. Still renting that little apartment of yours? And yet, here he was, unable to cover the rent on a house I owned. I told the property manager to give him 1 more week. 1. After that file. That week came and went. No payment. And that's when the eviction paperwork began. By the time Gary received the notice taped to his front door, Christmas lights were already strung along the neighborhood. I can only imagine how his stomach must have dropped when he saw those stark black letters. Failure to pay rent. 30 days to vacate. The man who once lectured me on stability was now standing in the driveway of a house that wasn't his, clutching a notice that told him his time was up. But the sweetest part? He still didn't know it was me. To him, it was just a landlord. Some faceless owner who didn't care about his struggles. He had no idea that the failure niece he mocked at Thanksgiving held the deed. And that soon he'd be knocking on my door, not to gloat but to beg. Because one cold January morning, I opened my front door, and there was Uncle Gary, red-faced and desperate, asking if I could pull some strings with his mysterious landlord. It was the first week of January when it happened. The air outside was sharp, the kind of cold that bites at your cheeks, and I was curled up on the couch with my laptop when I heard a knock at my front door. At first, I assumed it was a delivery. But when I opened the door, there stood Uncle Gary. His face was red from the cold, or maybe from embarrassment. He wasn't wearing his usual smug grin. Instead, he looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, his hands stuffed deep into his jacket pockets. "Claire," he said, forcing a smile. "Hey, kiddo." I blinked, caught off guard. "Uncle Gary, hi. Mind if I come in?" he asked, his tone lighter than his eyes. I stepped aside, curiosity buzzing through me. He moved awkwardly into the living room, scanning the modest space as if he'd never really seen where I lived before. After a long pause, he cleared his throat. "So listen, I was hoping you could help me out with something." I raised an eyebrow. "Help you out?" "Yeah," he said quickly, shifting in his seat. "You know how I'm renting that place on Maple Drive? Well, the landlord's been giving me a hard time. Total shark. They've slapped me with late fees, and now they're threatening eviction. It's all very unfair." He sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "I just need a little time, that's all. And I thought, since you're, good with computers and paperwork, you might be able to, I don't know, reach out? Pull some strings." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Pull some strings. The strings were mine to pull. Every single one of them. I folded my hands on my lap, trying to keep my expression neutral. "So, you're saying you're behind on rent?" He bristled. "Well, I wouldn't put it like that. The landlord raised the rent unfairly, and I've had some cash flow issues. The market dipped. Things happen. Funny. Just a month earlier, he'd been lecturing me on stability. And what exactly do you want me to do?" I asked softly. Gary leaned forward, lowering his voice like we were conspiring. "Maybe just send an email on my behalf. You've always been the quiet type, but you're smart, Claire. You know how to deal with people. If you could convince this landlord to back off, Give me a little breathing room. I'd owe you one. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. He still didn't know. He had no idea whose name was on that deed, whose bank account his late rent was supposed to flow into. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one feeling small. Because I knew something he didn't. And I was seconds away from changing the entire balance of power. I leaned back in my chair, took a deep breath, and finally said the words that would wipe the smugness off my uncle's face forever. Gary, I am your landlord. I'll never forget the look on his face. I leaned back, folded my arms across my chest, and said it as calmly as I could. Gary, I am your landlord. For a moment, he just blinked at me like I'd spoken in another language. Then he let out a short, nervous laugh. Come on, Claire. Don't joke around. This is serious. I'm not joking. My voice was steady now, stronger than I felt inside. The property on Maple Drive? I own it. I've owned it since last spring. The notices you've been getting? They're from my property manager. Your rent checks, when you bother to send them, come to me. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His jaw worked as if trying to form words, but nothing came out. I let the silence stretch. For once, I wasn't the one fumbling for a response. Finally, he shook his head. No, that's not possible. You don't even own your own house. You rent. Correct, I said. I rent my apartment. By choice. But I own 4 properties, including the one you're living in. It's called investing, Uncle Gary. Maybe you've heard of it. His mouth opened, then snapped shut. He looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. You mean to tell me, he said slowly, that while I was sitting at Thanksgiving telling you to get your act together, you were already... He broke off, shaking his head again. No, that doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, I said quietly. I've worked 2 jobs for years. I saved every dollar I could. I bought small, modest houses and rented them out. It doesn't look flashy, but it's stable. Reliable. Something you used to tell me I should want, remember? His eyes narrowed. You let me sit there and make a fool of myself. I tilted my head. No, Gary. You did that all by yourself. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, tugging at his collar, as if the room had suddenly gotten hotter. I just need some time, he muttered. You can give me that, right? Family takes care of each other. I almost laughed. Family. The same family that had sat around the table and let him humiliate me without saying a word. Now, suddenly I was supposed to bail him out. And maybe I could have. But the truth was, I wasn't interested in rescuing him. Not after years of his smugness. Not after that Thanksgiving dinner. No, I was interested in something else entirely. Payback. Gary thought I'd let him slide because we were family. What he didn't realize was that I already had a plan, and it didn't involve mercy. Gary sat on my couch, fidgeting with his hands, waiting for me to soften. But I didn't. For the first time in my life, I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to hand it back. Claire, he said carefully, his voice almost pleading, we're family. You can't just toss me out. I'll get the money together, I swear. I just need a little more time. I studied him. This was the same man who once told me I'd end up begging at 40 if I didn't get serious about life. The same man who sneered at my modest car, my second-hand clothes, my decision to work extra jobs instead of living a little. Now he was the one begging. Gary, I said softly, business is business. You signed a lease. You broke it. If it were any other tenant, I'd be filing the eviction already. His eyes darted to mine, searching for mercy. But it's not any other tenant. It's me. I leaned forward, letting my words cut slow and deliberate. Exactly. It's you. And if you think I'm going to let you slide, after the way you've treated me, you don't know me at all. His face flushed. So what, you're going to throw your own uncle out on the street? That's cold, Claire. Real cold. No, I said, tilting my head. I'm going to let the lease terms handle it. You either pay what you owe plus fees or you leave. Those are your choices. He stood up suddenly, pacing. This is insane. You're just a kid. You don't know what you're doing. You think owning a couple little houses makes you better than me? I've lived life, Claire. I've worked hard. I almost laughed at the irony. He, standing in front of me with overdue rent, lecturing me on hard work. I stood too, meeting his height. This isn't about being better. It's about accountability. Something you've avoided your whole life. For a long, tense moment, we just stared at each other. He was waiting for me to cave, to tell him it was all a misunderstanding, that I'd give him a break. But I didn't flinch. Finally, he grabbed his jacket, muttering under his breath. At the door, he turned back, his voice low and bitter. "You'll regret this, Claire. Family always comes back around." The door slammed behind him, and I stood in the silence, my heart pounding, but steady. Because the truth was, I didn't regret it. Not even a little. I'd waited years for this moment. And soon, the entire family would know exactly what happened when Gary tried to belittle me. By the next family gathering, the story had spread, and I walked into the room no longer the niece to be mocked, but the landlord who had turned the tables. The next family gathering was in February, at Aunt Linda's house. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt the shift. It wasn't like Thanksgiving. No sidelong glances. No quiet chuckles at my expense. Instead, conversations dipped when I entered, and curious eyes followed me. I didn't have to wonder why. News travels fast in families, and apparently, Gary had been doing plenty of complaining. Sure enough, I spotted him across the room. He looked thinner, his suit a little looser on him, and his usual booming laugh was gone. He sat in the corner, nursing a drink, avoiding eye contact. "Claire," Aunt Linda greeted me, pulling me into a hug. But her voice carried a new warmth, almost respect. "I heard you've been busy with real estate. Good for you." Busy. That was one word for it. Before I could answer, my cousin pulled me aside. "So, it's true? You own the Maple Drive house." I smiled. Among others. A ripple went through the group, like the word had been waiting to spread from ear to ear. I could practically feel the narrative shifting. No longer the quiet, directionless niece. No longer the one Gary mocked for not owning anything. Now, I was the one with the keys, the landlord, the investor, the one who'd turned Gary's arrogance into his downfall. Dinner was awkward for him, glorious for me. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was clipped bitter. Every so often, I caught him glancing at me, as if daring me to announce it to the table myself. But I didn't need to. The room already knew. Instead, I sat tall, letting the silence do the work. Halfway through dessert, Aunt Linda sighed and said what everyone else was thinking. "It's funny how things turn out. Last holiday, Gary was giving you such a hard time about not having a house. And now, well." She trailed off, but the meaning was clear. I met Gary's eyes across the table. For once, he didn't have a comeback. And in that silence, I felt something settle inside me. Vindication. Not just for me, but for every snide remark, every dismissive laugh, every time I'd been told I wasn't enough. The tables had turned. As the night wound down, I slipped on my coat and headed for the door. Just before leaving, I glanced back at Gary. "Take care of yourself," I said lightly. He scowled but didn't reply. And I walked out, not just the quiet niece anymore, but the woman who had made her uncle her tenant. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you.